Hi, I'm Staff Sergeant Kate Sullivan. For years, my sister Megan mocked my military deployments, calling me a professional killer who wasted her college education on government-sponsored violence instead of building a real career. She thought humiliating me about my sniper training would prove that civilized people solve problems with words, not weapons. What she didn't know was that when armed criminals took our father hostage during a home invasion, her feminist studies degree would be useless.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
And the barbaric skills she'd spent years ridiculing would become the only thing capable of bringing him home alive.
The skills Megan called professional killing weren't acquired through casual military service. They represented 6 years of the most demanding training in the United States Army, culminating in my qualification as a designated marksman with the 101st Airborne Division's elite reconnaissance unit. My specialization in precision shooting had required months of intensive instruction that tested every aspect of mental discipline, physical control, and tactical judgment. Sniper training wasn't about violence. It was about precision, patience, and the mathematical calculations required to place a single shot exactly where it needed to go under conditions that tested every aspect of human capability. The courses I'd completed at Fort Benning included advanced ballistics, wind reading, target identification, and the psychological preparation needed to make life-or-death decisions from distances exceeding 1,000 meters. But to Megan, my specialized training represented everything wrong with American foreign policy and military culture. As a graduate student pursuing her PhD in gender studies at Berkeley, she viewed my sniper qualification as evidence that I'd been brainwashed into accepting violence as a solution to problems that should be resolved through diplomacy and social justice advocacy. Kate has become a tool of the military-industrial complex, she'd tell anyone who would listen during family gatherings, positioning my military service as evidence of moral failing rather than a professional commitment to protecting American interests overseas. She's trained to kill people from long distances, and she thinks that makes her a hero instead of recognizing what it actually makes her. My foundation in the military had been built through genuine calling rather than lack of civilian options. After graduating from Oregon State with a degree in criminal justice, I'd chosen Army service specifically because I wanted to make a tangible difference in protecting communities from threats that civilian law enforcement couldn't handle. The path to sniper qualification had been the most challenging thing I'd ever attempted. Physical training that pushed human endurance beyond normal limits, marksmanship instruction that required hitting targets the size of dinner plates from distances where most people couldn't even see the target, and psychological preparation for operating alone in hostile territory where mistakes meant mission failure or friendly casualties. My 3 deployments to Afghanistan had involved reconnaissance missions that provided intelligence for operations protecting forward operating bases and Afghan civilians from insurgent attacks. The precision shooting skills Megan characterized as barbaric violence had actually prevented larger conflicts by neutralizing specific threats without causing collateral damage that would inflame anti-American sentiment. But Megan saw none of that complexity. To her, I was the sister who'd chosen violence over education, military service over social progress, and conservative values over the enlightened worldview she'd developed through her academic studies in Berkeley's progressive environment. Growing up in our Portland family had meant that intellectual achievement and social consciousness were valued above everything else. Our parents were both college professors. Dad taught political science at Portland State University, while Mom was a literature professor at Lewis and Clark College. Dinner conversations revolved around academic discourse, social justice issues, and the belief that education could solve any problem if applied with sufficient intelligence and moral commitment. Megan had embraced this family philosophy completely, pursuing graduate work that focused on dismantling patriarchal power structures and advocating for nonviolent approaches to conflict resolution. Her academic success had made our parents proud, while my military career created ongoing tension about whether armed service was compatible with the progressive values our family claimed to represent. Kate could be doing important work in social justice or community organizing, but instead, she's overseas participating in American imperialism and learning skills that have no value in civilized society. Skills that have no value in civilized society. Megan was about to discover that civilization was more fragile than her academic theories suggested, and that some threats required responses that couldn't be found in graduate school textbooks or feminist theory seminars.
Megan and I had been inseparable as children, the kind of sisters who built pillow forts during thunderstorms and created elaborate fantasy worlds where we were powerful heroines, saving imaginary kingdoms from various threats. Growing up in our progressive Portland household, we'd shared a bedroom filled with books, art supplies, and dreams about changing the world through intelligence and determination. Kate's going to be a detective someday, Megan would tell our parents' academic colleagues during faculty dinner parties, beaming with pride when I won debate tournaments or excelled in logic and critical thinking competitions. She's the smartest person I know, and she's going to solve crimes and protect people who can't protect themselves. Our relationship had been built on mutual admiration and complementary strengths. Megan excelled in creative writing and social theory, developing the communication skills that would eventually make her a compelling advocate for social justice causes. I gravitated toward analytical thinking and problem solving, which pointed toward careers in law enforcement or criminal justice. For years, our different interests had been sources of strength rather than conflict. When I struggled with literature assignments, Megan would help me understand character motivation and thematic analysis. When she needed help with statistics or research methodology, I'd guide her through data analysis and logical argument construction. The Sullivan sisters are going to change the world, our father would tell his political science colleagues, describing how his daughters represented different approaches to creating positive social change. Megan will change hearts and minds through education and advocacy, while Kate will protect communities through justice and law enforcement. But something had shifted when I chose military service over civilian law enforcement or graduate school. Megan had expected me to become an FBI agent or pursue a law degree that would lead to prosecutor work focused on domestic violence or civil rights violations. Instead, I'd chosen Army service that would take me overseas to conflicts she viewed as fundamentally unjust. Kate's wasting her potential on military violence, she'd started telling our parents during my basic training, her tone suggesting disappointment rather than pride. She could be fighting for social justice here at home, but instead, she's participating in American imperialism abroad. The first serious strain appeared when I completed sniper training and began preparing for my first deployment to Afghanistan. Megan couldn't understand why someone with my intelligence and moral reasoning would choose to develop skills specifically designed for killing people, even if those people were enemy combatants threatening American soldiers and Afghan civilians. "You're training to be an assassin," she'd said during one particularly painful conversation before my deployment, her voice carrying genuine horror at what she perceived as my moral transformation. "How is that different from the criminals you once wanted to arrest?" The question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about military service and the role of precision shooting in protecting friendly forces. Megan viewed sniper training through the lens of civilian law enforcement, where deadly force was only used as a last resort in immediate self-defense situations. But in combat zones, precision shooting prevented larger conflicts by neutralizing specific threats before they could harm American soldiers or Afghan civilians. The skills she characterized as assassination were actually surgical applications of force designed to minimize casualties and protect the maximum number of people. Kate's become someone I don't recognize, Megan had told our mother during a conversation I'd overheard while on leave, her voice filled with sadness rather than anger. She talks about killing people like it's a technical problem to be solved, rather than a moral crisis that should keep her awake at night.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The relationship that had once been built on shared values and mutual support had transformed into something more complicated. Megan positioned herself as the sister who'd maintained our family's commitment to nonviolence and social progress, while I'd chosen military service that contradicted everything our progressive upbringing had taught us about resolving conflicts through education and moral persuasion. "I still love Kate," she'd explained to friends who asked about our strained relationship, "but I can't support what she's chosen to become. There's a difference between protecting people and being trained to kill them." The sister who'd once celebrated my analytical thinking and problem-solving abilities now viewed those same capabilities as evidence that I'd been corrupted by military culture into accepting violence as an appropriate response to complex geopolitical problems that required diplomatic and humanitarian solutions.
The betrayal reached its devastating peak during my homecoming celebration after my third deployment to Afghanistan, when what should have been a family reunion became Megan's platform for the most vicious attack on my military service and personal character that I'd ever experienced. The gathering was held at our parents' Portland home, with extended family and family friends invited to welcome me back from 18 months overseas. I'd been looking forward to this moment for weeks, excited to share stories about the successful missions our unit had completed and the Afghan civilians we'd helped protect from Taliban insurgents. My precision shooting had contributed to operations that saved American lives and prevented terrorist attacks on villages that were trying to rebuild after decades of conflict. "Before we eat dinner," Megan announced to the assembled group, "I think we should have an honest conversation about what Kate has really been doing overseas and what that means for our family's values." The comment immediately shifted the atmosphere from celebration to confrontation, with relatives looking uncomfortable as Megan prepared to deliver what became a calculated character assassination disguised as moral concern for my psychological welfare. "Kate likes to call herself a soldier," Megan continued, her voice carrying the righteous conviction of someone delivering a lecture to students who needed enlightenment about important social issues. "But let's be honest about what she actually does. She's a trained killer who uses high-powered rifles to shoot people from long distances." Trained killer. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation, reducing 6 years of military service and specialized training to the kind of criminal activity that our family had always opposed through their commitment to education and social justice. "The military has conditioned Kate to view human beings as targets, rather than people with families, hopes, and dreams," she continued, apparently having prepared remarks for this moment. "She's been psychologically programmed to pull a trigger without considering the moral implications of ending someone's life." The attack was cruel and public, delivered in front of family members who'd gathered to honor my service, but were now hearing my sister characterize my military career as evidence of moral corruption and psychological damage. Kate came home talking about confirmed kills like they were achievements to be proud of, Megan told our horrified relatives, using terminology that sounded sinister when stripped of military context. "She's lost the ability to see enemy combatants as human beings because the military has trained her to dehumanize people she's supposed to kill." But the most devastating aspect of her attack was how she positioned my military service as betraying our family's progressive values and educational tradition. "Our parents raised us to believe that violence is never the answer to complex problems," she said, looking directly at me while addressing the room. Kate chose to reject those values in favor of becoming a tool for American imperialism and military aggression. American imperialism and military aggression. Megan was characterizing my service protecting Afghan civilians and American soldiers as participation in unjust war rather than defense against terrorist organizations that targeted innocent people. The Kate who left for the army was someone who wanted to protect people, she continued, her voice filled with theatrical sadness. The Kate who came back is someone who's been trained to kill people and thinks that makes her a hero instead of recognizing what it actually makes her. The betrayal was complete and calculated, delivered during what should have been a celebration of my safe return from combat deployment. Megan had chosen the moment when I was most vulnerable, surrounded by family, exhausted from deployment, hoping for support and understanding, to deliver a public humiliation that reduced my military service to criminal violence. Some families have children who grow up to heal the world through education and compassion, she concluded, her voice carrying the finality of someone delivering a verdict. Other families have children who choose violence and call it patriotism. I'll let everyone decide which category Kate represents. The sister who'd once dreamed about saving imaginary kingdoms with me had just publicly declared me a morally corrupted killer whose military service embarrassed our family's commitment to nonviolent social change.
In the weeks following the homecoming humiliation, Megan launched a sophisticated campaign to justify her public attack on my military service by positioning herself as the concerned sister trying to help me recognize the moral damage caused by sniper training and combat deployment. Every family interaction became an opportunity to reinforce her narrative about my need for psychological intervention rather than celebration. Kate's having trouble readjusting to civilian life became Megan's standard explanation when relatives asked about the tension between us and my obvious emotional withdrawal from family gatherings. Combat deployment changes people in ways they don't always recognize, and sometimes families have to help veterans understand what they've become. What they've become. Megan had rebranded my military service as psychological transformation that required therapeutic intervention rather than honored sacrifice that deserved family support and community recognition. She began sharing carefully edited stories about my deployment experiences, emphasizing the violence while ignoring the humanitarian missions and civilian protection operations that had motivated my service. When I mentioned successful counter-sniper operations that protected Afghan villages, Megan retold them as Kate's obsession with reliving combat violence instead of processing trauma. When I described precision shooting that had prevented terrorist attacks on American forces, she translated it for family consumption as Kate's inability to move beyond military mindset and develop healthy civilian relationships. The most insidious aspect of her campaign was how she recruited our parents' academic colleagues to participate in what became a psychological intervention disguised as family concern. Professor Williams from Dad's political science department started asking patronizing questions about my adjustment challenges and whether I'd considered therapy for combat-related moral injury. Kate's intelligence makes her situation more tragic, Professor Williams would say, with the kind of tone usually reserved for discussing students who'd made poor life choices. Someone with her analytical capabilities should be able to recognize how military training has affected her moral reasoning and emotional development. Moral reasoning and emotional development. As if my ability to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure indicated psychological dysfunction rather than professional competence earned through demanding training and proven under combat conditions. Megan also began controlling the family narrative about military service by distinguishing between defensive military roles that protected American soil and offensive military roles that involved overseas operations she characterized as American imperialism. My sniper training was presented as evidence that I'd chosen the most morally problematic military specialization possible.
There are military jobs that focus on humanitarian assistance and peacekeeping, she'd explained to anyone who questioned her criticism of my service. Kate specifically chose training that's designed for killing people, which says something about her psychological preferences that should concern everyone who loves her. The financial manipulation was equally calculating. Megan began suggesting that my military benefits and combat pay meant I didn't need to pursue civilian career development or educational advancement that would help me transition away from military mindset. Kate's financially secure through her military compensation, she'd tell relatives who suggested I consider using my GI Bill benefits for graduate school. But money can't heal the psychological damage caused by being trained to kill people for a living. But perhaps the most painful manipulation was how Megan repositioned my commitment to continued military service as evidence that I was addicted to violence, rather than dedicated to using specialized skills for protecting other soldiers through specialized skills that civilian careers couldn't provide. Kate talks about re-enlisting like it's a career decision, but it's really about someone who can't function in peaceful environments because she's become psychologically dependent on military structure and combat-related activities. The conversation suggested that my plans for continued service represented pathological behavior rather than professional commitment to using specialized skills for protecting American interests and supporting military operations that saved lives. Most devastatingly, Megan convinced our parents that encouraging my military career was enabling self-destructive behavior that prevented me from developing healthy civilian relationships and pursuing educational opportunities that would help me recover from combat deployment. The best thing we can do for Kate is stop acting proud of military service that's damaged her psychologically. Maybe if we stop reinforcing her military identity, she'll be able to heal and pursue work that doesn't require violence.
The awakening came during a routine afternoon at the Portland Veterans Affairs Medical Center, where I was volunteering to help combat veterans navigate the complex process of accessing mental health services and disability benefits. I was counseling a young Marine who'd lost his leg to an IED in Iraq when he asked a question that crystallized everything wrong with Megan's narrative about my military service. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," said Corporal James Mitchell, a 22-year-old from rural Oregon who'd been struggling with civilian adjustment after medical discharge, "how do you handle family members who think military service turned you into someone damaged instead of someone stronger?" The question hit me with unexpected force because it revealed how widespread the civilian misconceptions about combat veterans had become. Families across America were treating military service as psychological damage rather than professional development that created capabilities civilian education couldn't provide. "My sister says I'm a trained killer who can't function in peaceful society," I found myself admitting to the group of veterans I was supposed to be helping. "She thinks sniper training made me morally corrupt instead of professionally competent." The reaction was immediate and validating. 12 combat veterans, representing every branch of service and multiple deployment experiences, responded with recognition that told me I wasn't alone in facing family members who couldn't distinguish between criminal violence and military precision. "Ma'am, that's not about your training," said Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a former combat medic who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. "That's about civilians who want military protection without understanding what professional soldiers actually do to provide that protection." The observation reframed Megan's criticism in terms of broader civilian attitudes about military service. She wasn't just uncomfortable with my sniper training, she was unwilling to acknowledge that her peaceful academic life was protected by people who possessed capabilities she found morally disturbing. "My family thinks I'm damaged because I can function under pressure that would paralyze most civilians," explained Sergeant First Class Robert Chen, an Army Ranger who'd completed multiple special operations deployments. "They don't understand that military training creates strength, not weakness." The conversation continued for over an hour, with veterans sharing stories about family members who treated combat experience as psychological dysfunction rather than professional expertise that civilian careers couldn't match. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, you've been helping veterans in this community for months, observed Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a Navy EOD specialist who diffused explosives in Iraq and Afghanistan. Maybe it's time for someone to help you understand that your family's attitude is their limitation, not yours. The awakening was sudden and complete. I'd been accepting Megan's narrative that my military service created problems I needed to fix, when the real problem was civilian family members who couldn't appreciate capabilities they'd never needed but might someday depend on for their survival. Ma'am, your sister's academic theories about nonviolence are luxury beliefs, Corporal Mitchell observed with the clarity that comes from experience in combat before age 20. She can afford to criticize military training because she's never faced threats that require the skills she's condemning. Your sister's feminist studies degree won't stop armed criminals, Staff Sergeant Gonzalez said bluntly. But your sniper training might save her life someday, whether she appreciates it or not. The comment proved prophetic in ways none of us could have imagined. Within 6 months, Megan's academic theories about nonviolent conflict resolution would be tested against a situation where the only thing standing between our family and tragedy would be the barbaric skills she'd spent years condemning. The awakening had transformed my understanding of the conflict between us. This wasn't about my moral development. It was about Megan's inability to comprehend that some problems required solutions that couldn't be found in graduate school seminars or feminist theory textbooks.
My strategy for dealing with Megan's ongoing criticism was simple but profound. Stop defending my military service with words and start letting actions demonstrate the value of skills she'd never needed but might someday depend on for survival. The realization from the VA support group had shifted my perspective from trying to justify my choices to preparing for the moment when theory would collide with reality. The psychological preparation was crucial. Megan had spent years positioning herself as morally superior because she'd chosen education over violence, academic activism over military service, and theoretical solutions over practical capabilities. She genuinely believed that intelligence and moral reasoning could resolve any conflict if applied with sufficient compassion and understanding. Megan's academic success has insulated her from situations where nonviolent approaches aren't options. I explained to my veteran support group during one of our weekly meetings. She's never faced threats that couldn't be deterred through discussion or resolved through social justice advocacy. The beauty of my new approach was that it required no confrontation or argument. Instead of defending sniper training against her criticism, I would simply maintain my skills while letting circumstances demonstrate their value if such demonstration ever became necessary. The tactical preparation was equally important. My sniper training required constant practice to maintain precision and readiness, but I'd been neglecting this maintenance partly because of family pressure to move beyond military mindset. Now I resumed regular range time, keeping my marksmanship skills sharp while pursuing additional certifications that enhanced my capabilities. Staff Sergeant Sullivan is maintaining proficiency standards that exceed active duty requirements, observed Master Sergeant Williams, the range instructor who monitored my practice sessions. Whatever's motivating this level of preparation, it's producing exceptional results. The motivation was simple. I'd realized that Megan's criticism revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how security was created and maintained. While she studied theoretical approaches to conflict resolution, I was maintaining practical capabilities for stopping conflicts that couldn't be resolved through academic discussion. But the most important element of my strategy was patience. I could have explained the tactical scenarios where precision shooting prevented larger conflicts, could have detailed the humanitarian missions where military force protected innocent civilians, could have described the psychological strength required to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Instead, I chose to let Megan continue her narrative about my moral corruption, while I quietly prepared for the possibility that circumstances might require capabilities she'd dismissed as barbaric violence.
The gap between her theoretical understanding and practical reality would eventually become clear through events rather than arguments. The professional development aspect was equally strategic. I began pursuing advanced tactical training that enhanced my sniper capabilities, while also developing skills in hostage rescue, urban combat, and crisis intervention that civilian law enforcement couldn't provide. "Your additional certifications are impressive," noted Colonel Martinez during my reserve unit evaluation. "This level of specialized training suggests someone preparing for scenarios that require the highest level of precision and judgment." The irony wasn't lost on me that Megan's criticism had motivated me to become more skilled rather than less committed to military service. Her insistence that sniper training was morally corrupting had pushed me to pursue additional training that proved the opposite, that precision shooting required the highest levels of moral judgment and psychological strength. The civilians who criticize military capabilities usually don't understand that those capabilities require more discipline, not less, observed Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez during one of our veteran meetings. "Your sister's academic theories about violence are luxury beliefs that depend on other people maintaining skills she's too privileged to appreciate." When crisis eventually tested Megan's theories against reality, I would be prepared not just with the sniper skills she'd condemned, but with enhanced capabilities that could handle complex scenarios requiring exactly the kind of precision judgment that military training developed and civilian education couldn't provide. The strategy was designed to transform her theoretical criticism into practical vindication when circumstances required solutions that couldn't be found in feminist studies textbooks or conflict resolution seminars.
Tuesday, March 15th, 11:47 p.m. I was cleaning my rifle after a training session when my phone exploded with the call that would forever change Megan's understanding of what my barbaric skills could accomplish when academic theories proved inadequate against real-world violence. "Kate, something terrible is happening." Megan's voice was shaking with pure terror, stripped of the intellectual confidence that had characterized our relationship for years. "Armed men broke into Dad's house. They have him hostage. The police say they can't get close because the suspects have military-grade weapons and tactical positioning." Armed men with military-grade weapons. The nightmare scenario that Megan's feminist studies degree hadn't prepared her to handle, unfolding in real time while her nonviolent conflict resolution theories proved useless against criminals who couldn't be reasoned with or persuaded through moral arguments. "Are you safe? Where are you?" I asked, immediately shifting into tactical assessment mode while reaching for equipment that represented years of specialized training Megan had characterized as professional killing. "I'm with Mom at the police command post 3 blocks away," she sobbed. "The hostage negotiator says Dad's in the basement with 2 armed suspects who are demanding ransom money. They've already shot out windows and threatened to kill him if police get closer." Police command post. The same law enforcement professionals Megan had always supported were now admitting they lacked capabilities for resolving a situation that required precisely the kind of precision shooting she'd condemned as morally corrupt violence. "What are the police telling you about rescue options?" I asked, loading my gear bag with equipment that civilian law enforcement couldn't access or deploy effectively in urban hostage situations. "They say it's too dangerous to attempt a rescue because the suspects have clear sight lines from the basement windows," Megan replied, her academic confidence completely shattered by reality that couldn't be resolved through social justice advocacy. "The SWAT commander says any approach would likely result in Dad's death. Any approach would likely result in Dad's death. Except for approaches that required specialized training Megan had spent years characterizing as evidence of my moral corruption and psychological damage from military service. I arrived at the command post 23 minutes later, wearing tactical gear that represented capabilities civilian police couldn't match for precision shooting in urban hostage situations. The scene was exactly what I had expected. Law enforcement positioned at safe distances, while heavily armed criminals controlled a location that required surgical intervention rather than conventional police tactics. Staff Sergeant Sullivan reporting for consultation. I told Lieutenant Commander Torres, the SWAT team leader who was coordinating the response. I have specialized training that might be relevant to the situation. Ma'am, we've been told you have sniper qualifications, he replied, relief evident in his voice as he realized that military capabilities were available for a scenario that exceeded police tactical resources. The tactical situation was complex, but manageable for someone with my training. 2 armed suspects in a defensive position, 1 hostage requiring protection, urban environment with civilian safety considerations, and law enforcement coordination requirements that demanded precision rather than overwhelming force. I need overwatch position with clear sight lines to the basement, I told Lieutenant Commander Torres, while studying building layouts and suspect positioning reports that confirmed this was exactly the kind of scenario my sniper training was designed to handle. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, understand that this is a civilian law enforcement operation, he cautioned. Any shots fired must be coordinated with our tactical response to ensure hostage safety. As I moved into position with equipment Megan had mocked as tools of professional killing, I realized that everything she'd criticized about my military training, the precision shooting, the tactical thinking, the ability to make life-or-death decisions under pressure, was about to be tested against the kind of violence that academic theories couldn't prevent or resolve. The execution phase of our family's most terrifying crisis was about to demonstrate whether feminist studies or sniper training provided more practical value when criminal violence threatens someone we both loved.
At 12:34 a.m., positioned on the roof of the building adjacent to our father's house, I had clear sight lines through my rifle scope to the basement where 2 armed suspects held Dad hostage while demanding ransom money that police couldn't provide and Megan's academic theories couldn't negotiate. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, we have eyes on both suspects, came Lieutenant Commander Torres's voice through my tactical communication system. Hostage appears unharmed, but suspects are becoming increasingly agitated. Window for negotiated resolution is closing rapidly. Through my scope, I could see exactly what civilian law enforcement couldn't handle. 2 suspects with military-grade weapons positioned in a defensive location that required surgical precision rather than overwhelming force. The scenario was tailor-made for capabilities Megan had spent years condemning as barbaric violence. Roger, Command. I have clear shots on both targets, I replied, settling into the shooting position that represented thousands of hours of training Megan had characterized as learning to be a professional killer. Recommend simultaneous engagement to prevent return fire toward hostage. The transformation in Megan's attitude was immediate and desperate. The woman who'd publicly humiliated me for choosing violence over education was now standing behind police barriers, watching her sister prepare to use the exact skills she'd condemned to save their father's life. "Kate, please be careful," she whispered into the radio communication Lieutenant Commander Torres had allowed her to monitor, her voice stripped of the intellectual arrogance that had characterized our relationship for years. The irony was perfect and devastating. Megan's feminist studies degree, her academic theories about nonviolent conflict resolution, her moral superiority about rejecting military violence, none of it could help Dad survive a situation that required exactly the capabilities she'd ridiculed. "Target Alpha is moving toward hostage position," I reported, tracking the first suspect through my scope while calculating wind, distance, and timing for shots that would need to be executed with precision that civilian law enforcement couldn't achieve. "Recommend immediate engagement before suspect reaches hostage." "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, you are cleared to engage," Lieutenant Commander Torres authorized, giving me permission to use skills that Megan had called evidence of moral corruption, but were now our father's only hope for survival. The shot sequence lasted 2.3 seconds. My first round neutralized Target Alpha before he could reach Dad's position. My second round eliminated Target Beta before he could return fire or harm the hostage. The precision shooting that Megan had characterized as assassination was revealed as surgical application of force designed to protect innocent life. "Both targets down, hostage appears secure," I reported,
while SWAT teams moved in to clear the basement and extract Dad from a situation that could only be resolved through capabilities Megan had spent years dismissing as an unnecessary violence. "Ma'am, that was exceptional shooting under extremely challenging conditions," Lieutenant Commander Torres told me as I secured my weapon and prepared to reunite with family members who now understood the difference between academic theories and practical capabilities. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, your father is safe because of skills that civilian law enforcement couldn't provide. This is exactly why we need military-trained personnel available for situations that exceed our tactical capabilities." As we walked toward the family reunion that would forever change our dynamics, I realized that Megan's years of criticism had inadvertently motivated me to maintain exactly the level of proficiency that made Dad's rescue possible. Her condemnation had pushed me to excel at skills she'd never imagined might save his life. The professional killer she'd ridiculed had just demonstrated that some killing protects rather than destroys lives, and some violence prevents greater violence rather than causing it. The academic theories that had made her feel morally superior were powerless against criminals who couldn't be educated or persuaded to abandon their violent intentions.
3 years after the hostage rescue that shattered every assumption Megan had made about military service and sniper training, I stood before a packed auditorium at Portland State University delivering the keynote address at their Criminal Justice Symposium on military skills in civilian protection. The audience included law enforcement officers, security professionals, and academic researchers who were studying how specialized military training could enhance domestic security capabilities. Megan sat in the front row, now serving as Director of Community Outreach for the Pacific Northwest Veterans Crisis Response Foundation we'd established together. The sister who'd once condemned my sniper training as evidence of moral corruption had become one of the region's most effective advocates for integrating military expertise with civilian emergency response systems. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, clicking to a slide showing statistics about civilian hostage situations that exceeded police technical capabilities, "we've learned that some domestic security threats require military-level precision and training that traditional law enforcement cannot provide. The gap between civilian threats and civilian capabilities is growing, and military veterans can help bridge that difference." The foundation had revolutionized how Pacific Northwest communities approached high-risk domestic security situations by creating networks that connected military-trained veterans with local law enforcement agencies facing scenarios that required specialized skills. Our veteran response teams have successfully resolved 47 hostage situations, prevented 12 potential mass casualty events, and provided tactical support for operations that saved over 200 civilian lives, I continued, describing programs that had grown from the lessons learned during Dad's rescue. The media attention following that night had transformed both our careers in ways neither of us had anticipated. I'd been approached by the FBI to consult on domestic counterterrorism operations, while Megan's academic background had proven invaluable for translating military capabilities into language that civilian communities could understand and support. But perhaps the most satisfying triumph was Megan's complete intellectual transformation from critic to advocate. Her graduate studies in conflict resolution had been redirected toward understanding how military force could actually prevent larger conflicts when applied with proper precision and moral judgment. "Kate didn't just save our father," Megan had told CNN during our first joint interview after the rescue. "She saved my understanding of what courage actually looks like when academic theories meet real-world violence that can't be reasoned with or educated away." The hostage rescue had been documented as a case study in military-civilian cooperation, required reading at the FBI Academy and police tactical training programs nationwide. The precision shooting that Megan had condemned as professional killing was now recognized as life-saving skill that required the highest levels of moral judgment and technical competence. Our relationship had been completely rebuilt on mutual respect and shared mission rather than ideological conflict.
Megan now understood that her sister's military service involved capabilities that her academic experience couldn't evaluate, while I'd learned that her communication skills could be essential for building civilian support for military integration programs. The book we'd co-authored, When Violence Protects: Military Skills and Civilian Crisis Response, had become required reading for emergency management professionals and had influenced federal policy on veteran integration with domestic security operations. The sister I once called a professional killer, Megan would tell audiences at our joint presentations, taught me that some professions require the ability to take life in order to save life, and that moral courage sometimes means doing things that make comfortable people uncomfortable. But the most meaningful triumph was Dad's complete recovery and his transformation into one of our foundation's most effective advocates. The retired professor who'd once questioned whether military service was compatible with progressive values now spoke at veteran events about how specialized training had literally saved his life. My daughter's sniper training was the difference between my survival and my death, he would tell audiences. Academic theories about nonviolence are luxury beliefs that depend on other people maintaining capabilities I was too privileged to appreciate until those capabilities saved my life. The foundation had helped hundreds of veterans understand that their military skills had civilian applications that could protect communities while providing meaningful post-service careers that utilized their specialized training. Our family had been transformed from dysfunction based on ideological conflict to unity based on shared understanding that some problems require solutions that can't be found in textbooks or resolved through academic discussion. The professional killer Megan had ridiculed had become the protector she'd never known she needed. And the academic theories she'd used to condemn military service had been refined into practical programs that helped veterans serve their communities in ways that honored their training and their values. Sometimes, the people who condemn you the most severely become your greatest advocates once reality teaches them lessons that theory couldn't provide.
Standing in my daughter Riley's nursery 5 years later, looking at the framed photo of Dad being carried out safely by SWAT officers after the hostage rescue, I finally understood the profound gift Megan's criticism had given me. Her years of condemning my sniper training as barbaric violence had pushed me to maintain exactly the level of proficiency that saved our father's life when academic theories proved powerless against real-world threats. Riley, now 3 years old with her father's gentle nature and my analytical mind, discovered me studying the image one evening as I prepared for a lecture at the FBI Academy about the psychology of precision shooting and moral decision-making under extreme pressure. "Mommy, why did Aunt Megan used to be scared of your soldier job?" she asked with the innocent directness that cuts through adult complications to reach essential truths. I'd been anticipating this conversation, knowing that eventually I'd need to explain why her aunt had once viewed her mother's military service as evidence of moral corruption, why family relationships sometimes require transformation through crisis, and why the people who challenge us most severely can become our greatest teachers. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people think they understand things when they really don't," I said, lifting her onto my lap while she played with her toy helicopter, a gift from Megan, who now understood the life-saving importance of military capabilities. Aunt Megan thought my soldier training was bad because she didn't know it could be used to protect people we love. "Like how you saved Grandpa?" Riley asked, with the logical progression that children apply to complex situations. "Exactly like that. And now Aunt Megan helps other people understand that soldier skills can be good when they're used to help families." What Megan's years of condemnation had taught me was the difference between theoretical understanding and practical wisdom, between academic knowledge and life-tested competence. True strength, I'd learned, wasn't determined by intellectual sophistication or moral theories, but by the ability to act effectively when circumstances required capabilities that civilian education couldn't provide. The wisdom I'd gained from her criticism extended far beyond personal vindication.
Through the Foundation and our crisis response work, I'd seen how societal misconceptions about military service prevented communities from accessing capabilities that could save lives during domestic emergencies that exceeded police resources. One of the most important lessons I've learned, I told audiences at law enforcement conferences, is that the skills we dismiss as unnecessary or morally problematic are often the skills that matter most when comfortable assumptions about safety and security collapse under the weight of real violence. This perspective had transformed how we approached veteran integration with civilian emergency response systems. Instead of treating military training as psychological damage that required healing, we treated it as professional expertise that required proper application to benefit communities that needed capabilities beyond traditional law enforcement. Megan's transformation from my harshest critic to my closest collaborator had become a powerful symbol for bridging the gap between civilian misconceptions and military realities. Her academic background allowed her to translate military capabilities into language that progressive communities could understand and support, while her personal experience during Dad's rescue gave her credibility that no theoretical knowledge could provide. I spent years condemning my sister's sniper training without understanding what precision shooting actually required, she would tell audiences at our joint presentations. I thought it was about violence, but it's actually about preventing violence through surgical application of force that requires more moral judgment, not less. Our work had helped thousands of veterans understand that their military skills had civilian applications that honored their training and their values, while helping communities recognize that some domestic threats required responses that couldn't be found in social work textbooks or conflict resolution seminars. But perhaps the most profound wisdom came from understanding that Megan's intellectual arrogance had inadvertently motivated me to pursue excellence that exceeded minimum military standards. Her condemnation had pushed me to maintain proficiency levels that made Dad's rescue possible when academic theories proved inadequate against criminals who couldn't be educated or persuaded to abandon their violent intentions. The relationship that had been poisoned by ideological conflict had been healed through shared recognition that some problems require solutions that transcend political categories and academic theories. Military training and academic education could complement each other when both were applied with wisdom gained through experience that tested every assumption about how the world actually worked. The sister who'd called me a professional killer had learned that some professions require the ability to take life in order to save life, and that moral courage sometimes means accepting responsibility for capabilities that make comfortable people uncomfortable but keep innocent people safe.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.